Hello, and welcome to another episode of Captive Minds. I'm Max Perry, and I'm an independent journalist, and I'll be your host for the day. My work is currently syndicated in Covert Action magazine, and we have a very special guest joining us today. Before I introduce him, though, let me just say hello to my co-host and our producer, Shaenah Batterson. Hi, Shaenah.
Hi, Max. It's good to have another guest. It's
Yeah,
been a while.
been a while since we had a guest. So joining us today. And let me get you to set the record straight on this. Is it Kovalik or Kovalik?
Kovalik.
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 So
Yeah.
joining us today is Dan Kovalik, who many of you are probably familiar with, but in case you're not, Dan is an accomplished author, activist, and human rights and labor rights lawyer based in Pittsburgh. And he's the author of several terrific books on a host of important and topical issues, including the plot to attack Iran, how the CIA and the deep state have conspired to vilify Iran, the plot to scapegoat Russia, which has the same subtitle, as well as the case for Palestine, why it matters, and why you should care. Dan has traveled extensively to many of the places he's written about, from Nicaragua to the Donbass and eastern Ukraine to Syria, which Dan visited earlier this year. So Dan, welcome to Captive Minds. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So yeah, on the subject of Syria, that brings me to really my first question for you right off the bat. You wrote a recent article in Covert Action magazine as well on Syria, and I know you and Jeremy Kuzmarov have an upcoming book on Syria. We'd of course love to have you back on to discuss that when it comes out. But first, I know you visited the country earlier this year, just a short time after the very surprising ouster of its longtime president, Bashar al-Assad, in December. And that development, which stunned the world, it actually happened the same weekend that you and I briefly got to meet at the No Nuclear War event in DC that Scott Ritter put on.
Right, right. Yeah.
Uh, and so I guess my question for you is, when you were in Syria in January, did you get the sense that there was like impending sectarian violence coming against
Yes,
Alawites
because
and
it was
Christians?
already happening. It was already happening by then. Now, not on the scale it would happen, but so when I was there, yeah, first of all, I talked to, well, I have Alawite friends. I have Alawite and Christian friends in Syria. They were already telling me that things were getting bad. But I also, when I was in Syria, I'll just give a couple examples. I was out on the street in old Syria, actually, and having a drink, and the waiter overheard me saying that I was here to do reporting, and he said, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And but he would only do it um, with his face in shadow. And he said, "I'm an Alawite, and I want you to know there was a massacre in a neighborhood outside of Homs over the weekend in Western Homs." And he says, "I'm really afraid because there were probably even by that point hundreds of Alawites had already been killed. At that time, the violence was being focused on the town of Homs."
Hmm.
I also met a woman who is a university instructor. She's Alawite. And when I met her the day or two before, she had found out that another university professor, a friend of hers, Alawite, had been kidnapped and killed. And she herself, the woman I met, had just escaped a kidnapping attempt. Actually, a student of hers had tried to lure her away and kidnap her, but some other students intervened and said, "Don't go, don't meet that guy. He's going to kidnap you." And then I went to Malula, Syria, which I had been to before. So this is my third time in Syria. I was in Syria twice
Oh, wow.
when Assad was still president. And one of the towns I've been to three times is Malula, Syria, which has an ancient Christian community which speaks Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ, one of the last places in the world to do that. And already by then, about a quarter of the Christian community in Malula had already fled. And those that left were telling me things are bad. It was like a ghost town, honestly. It had been a very vibrant tourist spot for Christians from around the world because it has some of the oldest churches in the world. And it's very beautiful too. I mean, it's a storybook place with the homes built into the mountains, and but no one was there. I mean, the churches were empty, and again, it was clear people were afraid. So yeah, it was very clear to me that things were not good. But again, they had not reached their climax yet.
Hmm.
That so I was there at the end of January. And then in the beginning of March, after I left, that's when the violence really sped up, where they were starting to kill Alawites in the thousands. And that was starting to take place in the coastal region, in towns like Tartus and Latakia. I've been to Latakia as well. I have friends in Latakia. And the friends I have, by the way, my Alawite friends in Homs and Latakia, they're in hiding. I mean, they don't leave their house. They don't go to school. They don't go to work. They don't go grocery shopping. They're very afraid. And yeah, no, so the violence has now begun in earnest because essentially, in you probably read in my article, there was a Christian church in Damascus that was bombed about 2 weeks ago or so, killing 22 people, I believe, 22 Christians. So the violence has begun in earnest, and the reason it has is because the new government, the new Al Qaeda government, sussed out that no one cared, right? So they were waiting for governments like the U.S. and Western governments to recognize them, end sanctions, promise aid. And once that happened, they were like, okay, we're going to take the gloves off. We don't have to pretend anymore. And they really started going after the religious minorities in a very aggressive way. So, and they continue to. I mean, it's terrible. And also, the other thing people need to know that's happening is that women and girls, particularly Alawites, are being kidnapped and brought into sexual slavery. I mean,
Yeah.
it's abominable. But meanwhile, Trump meets with the new leader and shakes his hand and says yeah, great guy. Yeah, he's a great guy. He's a great past. You know. So there you go. That's Syria in a nutshell. But and I know some Syrians. Most of my Syrian friends, like in Pittsburgh, are Syrian Christians, and they always, they had criticisms of Assad, right? They were not, but they did realize that their family's lots in Syria were better off under him. They knew he was preventing the worst from happening, and they were very. When he fell, they knew the trouble was coming. But then I know a few other Syrians who applauded the downfall of Assad, but even they are like, we were wrong. These people are nuts.
Yeah.
They're bad people. So, really, there's been a reckoning. Like, those of us who were critical of these regime change efforts have been vindicated, but in a way, none of us want to be vindicated. I mean, I'm not going to say I told you so when people are dying. I mean, but, the truth is, we were right to take the position we did. And now Syria's lost. I mean, a lot, Syria's literally on fire. The terrorists are setting fires again in the coastal region to try to literally smoke out the Alawites. They want to push the Alawites and Christians out. And the truth is, the Christians, I mean, I'm reading, the Christians will largely leave. This is where the Christian church was born.
Hmm.
The head of St. John the Baptizer is in Syria, right? St. Paul had his conversion on the road to Damascus, as we all know. This is a very important Christian country, and it will be a country without Christians. But that's true in Palestine. Same thing has happened, right? And so it's a tragedy, and that the West, which claims to be, Judeo-Christian in its values, is okay with this. It's just unbelievable. It's just
Yeah,
shocking.
you were talking about the women being sold into sex slavery. I was reading a report in Reuters about that, but I've noticed that the mainstream media, it's even though they're acknowledging the persecution of Alawites, they seem to be using estimates as far as like the number of victims in the low thousands. But I've seen others suggesting that the numbers are much higher, even possibly tens of thousands. Do you think that the number of victims are being deliberately undercounted in these massacres?
Deliberately, I can't say, but I do think they're being undercounted. I mean, I've seen estimates up to 50,000. I think it's hard to know because a lot of the bodies have been disposed of, right? People been disappeared. So it's hard to know, but I think it's probably in the tens of thousands. It's really, I mean, it's fair to say that what's happening, certainly against the Alawites, is genocide. I think with the Christians, it may be more ethnic cleansing, which makes sense because the battle cry of the terrorists that the West supported in fighting Assad, their battle cry was Alawites to the grave, Christians to Beirut, right? Kill the Alawites, push the Christians out of the country. And that's what they're doing. That's, like you can't claim they didn't tell you what they were about, right? I mean, everyone knew that's what they wanted to do. And they were doing it to the extent they could, even under Assad, right? They would try to do that, and uh, the Syrian army and Hezbollah were very good at protecting the religious minorities, but that was the game
Yeah.
plan all along, and they're carrying it out. So,
Um, the Trump administration just removed actually Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the Syrian affiliate of Al-Qaeda, off the State Department's list of terrorist organizations. And you were talking about how Ahmed al-Shara or al-Jilani or whatever his name is this week, who's also a former ISIS commander.
right.
He's met with Macron and he met with Trump in May. The sanctions that were placed on Syria under Assad are likely going to be removed.
I
And
think they are. I think they are being
Jelani's
removed. Yeah.
indicated that he hopes Syria will be able to join the Abraham Accords. I mean, do you think that a deal with Israel is in the works here?
It's already happening. I mean, Jelani's going to give the Golan Heights back to Israel, even though the international community recognizes the Golan Heights as part of Syria. I mean, he's working hand in glove with Netanyahu. He met with Netanyahu, and he slipped up and started speaking in perfect Hebrew. I mean, he's a tool of Israel and the West. And how he got into Syria was that he had been part of ISIS in Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
and he was captured by the Americans setting off those IED explosives against the Americans. So he was captured. He was imprisoned on a U.S. military base, but then somehow he's freed. He ends up in Syria and starts fighting Assad, right? I mean, he clearly became, if he wasn't to begin with, he became an asset
Yeah.
of the West, and he is now. He's their best friend now, and certainly, they've ever had in Syria. And certainly, that again, he's very close to Israel. And by the way, it started, almost immediately started persecuting the Palestine Liberation Forces within Syria, taking their guns away, arresting some of the leaders, expelling some of the leaders. He's doing the bidding of the West. So,
You mentioned how Syrian Christians at one point with Hezbollah had been defending them, and I've read this before, and how a lot of Syrian Christians they really liked Nasrallah because of things that Hezbollah had done to defend them against HTS. And I think this would surprise a lot of Christians in the West. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about that with Hezbollah? And
yeah, and I'll be honest. When I went there in 2021, I was surprised. I mean, it just never occurred to me that Hezbollah would go around protecting Christians, right? I mean, but the more I learned about them, they have done that in Lebanon as well. I mean, the Shia and Hezbollah Shia and the leadership in Iran Shia, they believe in religious diversity. They're not against Christians, and they're not against Alawites or Sunnis. I mean, they're very pluralistic. And so, yeah, so I learned when I went there in 2021 that the town of Malula had been attacked by the Free Syrian Army, right? That Obama admitted to supporting.
Mhm.
And they kidnapped some of the nuns, and they tried to burn down Malula too, but they couldn't because it's all stone. Thank God, nothing would catch fire except the forest. So when I went there in 2021, you just saw saplings that had been recently planted because they had burned down the forest. But the churches, for the most part, wouldn't burn because they were stone. But they kidnapped the nuns, and they tried to take over the town and either convert or kill or expel the Christians. But yeah, Hezbollah came in and defended the Christians. And that happened also. I went to a church in Homs called has a very interesting name. It's called the Church of the Holy Girdle of Mary. And it claims to have a belt that the Virgin Mary wore.
Interesting.
And I met with the pastor there. It's one of the oldest churches in the world. I think dates back to 69 AD.
wow.
In fact, the original church is a cave underneath what is the church now that you can visit, because it was built by Christians who were persecuted by the Roman Empire, right? That's how old it is. And the priest that we met with said that, yeah, again, first of all, before the terrorists came to town, the Syrian army of Assad helped remove the belt of Mary and bring it to another city where they hid it. And so when the terrorists came to town, they were not able to get at that belt. So again, the Syrian army helped protect that. And then again, when they came to town, also tried to burn down the church, and they did burn down some of it because some of it was wood, but again, most of it didn't burn. But they destroyed all the relics in the church. And that was also true in Malula, in one of the churches. They destroyed all the relics. In fact, all the relics that were there when I visited by then in 2021 were simply replicas that a Russian Orthodox church had sent them. But again, yeah, it was Hezbollah that protected the town and protected that church. So if people realize this, they would be shocked. I mean, we live in total upside down world, right? And then if you even look, you look within Palestine, Israel's persecuting the Christians there, right? Destroying Christian churches.
And the Armenians too, right?
Well, yeah, and the Armenians as well. But if you go to Iran, for example, I was in Iran in 2017. There's many Armenian Christian churches there that are functioning. Ancient churches still have services. There's synagogues in Iran that operate. I visited one when I was there. There's a Jewish church, a Jewish hospital. in Tehran that the government has given millions of dollars to. Actually, President Ahmadinejad gave millions of dollars to them. Again, everything's the opposite of what we claim. It's the West that's persecuting the church. That's just a fact, and that's true in Ukraine, right? Where the Ukrainian government that the U.S. and the West are supporting has been also attacking Orthodox priests and attacking Orthodox churches, shelling some of the churches. And I have a
Yeah.
theory. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, before you were in Syria, I know that you traveled to Donbass in eastern
Yes.
Ukraine, and this was the fourth time that you in the last years you'd been there. And in your most recent trip, you spent time with the, I'm probably not saying this right, Kaivonos detachment, which is a volunteer unit of Ukrainian soldiers who defected to the Russian and separatist side. And you wrote about in Cam about the question of what will happen to them when the war comes to an end. And I think just the fact like Ukrainian soldiers defecting to the Russian side would surprise a lot of people that have just heard the mainstream account. Could you tell us just about your time there and about that?
Yes, yes. By the way, hold on. Did you lose my video here? Hold on, hold on.
Yeah, you're frozen.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm on my phone and
The CIA intervening too.
yes, yes. Yeah, no. So I mean, yeah, I met with these Ukrainian troops, yeah, that had defected and are now fighting for Russia's side, but they're independent. They have their own detachment of all
Okay.
Ukrainians, and they're fighting for the Russian side because they believe that the Zelensky government is fascist, that it's not operating in the benefit of the Ukrainian people. They don't want to fight their Russian brothers and sisters. So they went to the other side. And by the way, many of them have been forcibly conscripted by Ukraine. They resented that, you know, and they think in the end that they'll be better off under Russian, under the Russian flag. And I say I've been to the Donbass several times since the special military operations began, and I think I can say with a pretty strong degree of certainty that most people in the Donbass want to be part of Russia and welcome the Russians coming in. And that is, you know, an inconvenient truth for the West, but it's true, and it's not something hardly any Western press will recognize. But that's the truth, and I think the Western press has just totally abdicated its role in telling the truth about Ukraine. Maybe the truth is, Ukraine and Syria are probably the worst covered conflicts I've ever seen. I mean, where the lies are just outright lies and also lies by omissions.
Well, it
Uh,
seems like the Trump administration appears to be reversing course and resuming the lethal aid to Ukraine. I know that there was a pause announced in deliveries of missiles and other weapons last week by the Pentagon, but now Trump, I guess, is upset about that and wants to go back on his
yeah,
campaign pledge
yeah,
and push
no,
for aid.
I think. Well, first of all, I mean, it just has to be said about Trump that he seems to change his mind from day to day on many issues, right? I mean, he really is just completely erratic
Yeah.
as a leader. Is there a method to that madness? I doubt it. I mean, it's possible, but
I mean, Putin even said that. Putin said that he preferred to have Biden and or Hillary Clinton in office because at least you know what you're going to get with them, which is just the expansion of NATO and just the hostility, the Russophobia. But with Trump, it's like he says one thing, does another, says one thing, does another, and it's just back and forth, and you don't know what you're going to get.
yeah, he's completely arbitrary and capricious. I mean, really, every day he wakes up, he seems to have another idea about what he wants to do. And Ukraine's no exception. Like you said, one day they're cutting the aid off to Ukraine. Then he's saying, oh, no, we have to keep supporting Ukraine. And, I don't trust that he's going to end that war like he had promised to, because I think he felt, again, I don't think he's too grounded in reality. Also, I don't think he knows much about foreign affairs. And when he said a number of times that he would solve the crisis in Ukraine in 24 hours, I just think he thought he could convince the Russians to just take whatever deal he offered them, which is absurd. The Russians have lost tens of thousands of soldiers and spent billions of dollars on this war. They're not going to just give up and capitulate. So, and I think Trump's been frustrated by that. So, sadly, look, the war is going to continue till Russia wins, I think, unless the West does something drastic, like use nuclear weapons, which I don't rule out that possibility either. But it will not end, I don't think, with a U.S. brokered peace deal. I'll just say that.
In your writings, you mentioned something else, which I think a lot of people in the West that watch the mainstream media would be very surprised at. You mentioned the numbers of Ukrainians actually immigrating to Russia. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the Ukrainians who have left Ukraine during the conflict, I think Russia is either the number one or number two destination for them. Maybe Poland has a little more, but Russia's up there as a number one or number two. And yeah, what does that tell you? I mean, and they're not being forced to go there; they want to go there. And in the Donbass, I think even before the special military operations, about 500,000 Ukrainians had Russian passports. They feel very connected to Russia. I mean, it's just a fact, and they feel very safe in Russia. So, but again, that is a totally inconvenient fact for the Western narrative. In fact, when I one of my trips to Russia about a year or so ago, I went through Estonia, and on the way in to Russia, I was held in Russian customs for about 5 hours, which I don't mind saying, because I mean, people who say I'm a Russian dupe, I mean, it wasn't like I just waltzed in there. Like, they felt the need to talk to me, and anyway. But what I noticed is a lot of the other people sitting with me were Ukrainians trying to immigrate into Russia, you know, because I noticed their passports, they have blue passports like the American passports. So yeah, I found that interesting even then. But yeah, it's a fact. In fact, in the border city of Rostov on Don, you'll see a lot of cars with the Ukrainian license plates. So, because there's a strong connection between Kiev, the Ukraine and Russia. I mean, Kiev was the first capital of Russia.
Yeah, Kiev and Rus. Right?
Yeah.
And I know in the Baltic states, the ethnic Russian minority is basically subject to a kind of what's been characterized by some as like an apartheid-like condition, because they're being forcibly assimilated, and they can't. The language was removed, and they're being heavily discriminated against, much like the Eastern Ukrainians, the Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Eastern Ukraine as well. I did want to get to Iran, because I know you've also written about Iran, and with the recent unprecedented attack by the U.S. on their nuclear facilities, I felt like I can't go without asking you about that, since you wrote a book warning about this very scenario a few years ago. I mean, do you think that the U.S. is actually suicidal enough to start a war with Iran, or was this recent strike more about coming to Israel's aid? I mean, the Zionists seem dead set on provoking a conflict with Iran. I mean, and also, do you think that Iran's response was that a strategic victory for them, as far as how they very were very careful in their retaliation?
Yeah, well, they are, and they are always careful and measured in their responses. So again, this idea that Iran is some crazy country or something, I mean, their actions belie that claim, right?
Mhm.
They're much more measured in their responses than the US and Israel are. And again, it has to be said that Israel engaged in an unprovoked attack on Iran, and so did the United States. But Iran, while they did respond, they were very careful to target military targets and not to attack civilians. Do I think I do think that they won that round of the war, but I do think it's just one round of the war. I don't think it's over. I think the US will attack again. In fact, a lot of people believe Netanyahu's trip to Washington to meet with Trump is about planning the next attack on Iran, and I tend to believe that. I think they're spurred on by what happened in Syria, the regime change in Syria. Now they're high on their own supply, and they think that they can do the same thing in Iran. Yeah, so sadly, I don't think it's over. I don't think the Iranians think it's over. I think they realize that there will be more war in the future.
I don't think enough people are aware that Iran at one point had a democratic and secular government, which the CIA overthrew at the urging of the UK and British Petroleum. And I'm curious, how important of a factor do you think Mohammed Mossadegh's nationalization of the oil companies was in his overthrow, as well as do you think the desire to control oil resources drives US foreign policy at all?
Well, I think it's irrefutable that it was the nationalization of Iran's own petroleum, but it was controlled at that time by Britain, that led to the overthrow. I mean, in this book that I wrote called "The Plot to Attack Iran," I mean, I cite historical documents that were released by the State Department that show that that was the reason. Britain came to the U.S. twice to ask them to overthrow Mossadegh because of the nationalization. Once they came to Truman, Truman just turned them down. He's like, why do I care about your petroleum? But then under Eisenhower, Churchill, who was elected again after some time, he had lost after the
Yeah.
war. He went to Eisenhower, and he was smart. This time, he didn't mention the petroleum. He said that Mossadegh was a communist, which wasn't true, but that's what convinced Eisenhower to get involved. But it was motivated, Britain was motivated to ask them to do it because of the nationalization. And by the way, when the U.S. did overthrow Mossadegh, it itself took over most of the petroleum. It only left a fraction for Britain, right? Because their feeling was, hey, we did the work, so you know we're going to take the oil. And yeah, of course, I think there's obviously oil is not the only reason for the antipathy towards the Islamic Republic of Iran, but it's a big reason. I mean, the U.S. wants to control the Persian Gulf. And again, you don't have to, guess about that. Jimmy Carter, our so-called human rights president, declared in the 1970s that the U.S. had a right to intervene in the Persian Gulf to protect U.S. interests there, in particular U.S. oil interests there. That came to be known as the Carter Doctrine. It's basically like the Persian Gulf analog of the Monroe Doctrine, right? Um, so again, there's no secret about this. That is a big motivation for what the U.S. is doing in the Middle East.
You've also done great work on Gaza, and I wanted to ask you because I remember you went viral on social media actually back in October 2023 when you confronted Senator John Fetterman on camera about his shameful opposition to a ceasefire in Gaza, and you were captured on film, forcibly removed from the event where you bought a ticket to see Fetterman.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That video got over 9 million views.
I'm with the Congress team. If you'd like, I can talk to you.
No, I can talk to. I voted for him. I'm sorry, this is a democracy.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, but kind of, sort of. Why? 10,000 people in Gaza have been killed, half are children. The Pope's calling for a ceasefire. The UN has called for it. I'm just asking you. You're a good guy. I voted for you. I know you're a nice guy. This is important.
You need to leave.
Here, can I give you a phone?
He just assaulted him.
So what happened? The guy who removed you, was that like Fetterman's bodyguard? Or was he affiliated with the establishment? Can you tell us what happened exactly?
Well, I believe he was affiliated with the bar that this event was at, but he was clearly acting as Fetterman's kind of volunteer bodyguard. Hilariously, if you watch the video, it happened to be a Halloween season. I don't know if it was actually on Halloween, but it was like Halloween weekend. He was dressed like Fetterman.
Yeah, I did notice that actually.
With the bald wig and
the Carhartt sweatshirt.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it went viral. You could not make this stuff up. I could not have set it up any better than it was. So at one point, Fetterman kind of looks at the guy and is like, throw the bum out. He doesn't say it, but he clearly signals that that's what he wants. So yeah, the guy threw me out. And all I did is want to talk to him, give him a flyer, So there you go. But I knew, honestly, I was very gleeful when because I knew this would go viral, And I happened to have a friend videotaping it. Again, just because I wanted the interaction to be videotaped, but I really did not expect to be thrown out.
Yeah, he could have just told you that he didn't even say anything to you, right? He just basically. He could have denied, like he could have said, "I don't want to talk to you." It was just immediately went to 11 and went to 100 and threw you out physically. I mean,
that escalated quickly. It was dumb on his part because it would not have gone viral had he just walked away. No one would have cared, So, it was one of those things. Come and see the violence inherent in the system. If you're a Monty Python fan, that line. Yeah, and then you saw I confronted him again a second time, because it happened to be I was in Washington, D.C., and it was a Friday afternoon. I flew back to Pittsburgh, and that's when all the Congress people fly back to their hometowns for the weekend. And he happened to be sitting right in front of me. And so I followed him off the plane and I started asking him questions. I don't know if you saw that, but I said, some people compare you to Pol Pot or Idi Amin. I mean, I just had a great time, But anyway, yeah, he's a horrible human being. And I understand, by the way, his wife is in her heart pro-Palestinian, but ended up scrubbing her social media of all pro-Palestinian stuff. She's from Brazil. She's an immigrant from Brazil. Why she stays with him, I have no idea. Well, I do. Power and money. I guess that's enough for some people, but
he's got something wrong with him mentally.
No, yeah, everyone thinks that. He had a stroke, and everyone thinks that he was not the same after that. And yeah, all he cares about is Israel. In fact, a lot of staffers left his employ because they got tired of him, being just, pro-Israel all day long. Like, there's other issues to deal with. He's senator of a very important state, and he's a weird guy, and I don't know. He'll be up for re-election. They have long 6-year terms. I think he's got a few years left, but we'll see, one, if he runs again, and two, if he wins. But the establishment, for the most part, loves him because, you know, because they're pro-Zionist too, so.
You mentioned this a little bit before, but I think it's interesting watching how many Christians in the West are siding with Israel when you see these videos coming out, these Israelis saying like you spit in the faces of Christians, and the way in Palestine how the Christian community has really been targeted there. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, no, it's an important fact. I mean, the truth is, and there's that very outspoken, wonderful priest, Palestinian priest in Bethlehem, the Lutheran priest. I'm forgetting his name, but he's pointed that out. I mean, that basically these Christian Zionists, they don't care about real Christians, right? They want to bring on the apocalypse. They think they can bring it on if Israel takes over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? And there's some Zionists in Israel that believe the same thing and want to have this bizarre sacrifice with the red heifer and all this. I mean, it's just medieval stuff. This is just ancient superstitious stuff that has nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with real Christians. Probably most of them don't even know there's Christians that still live in Palestine and don't even realize Jesus was Palestinian. But yeah, that's true. I mean, they care more about this, what amounts to kind of, voodoo type ideas than about Christianity. And that's always been true. Every religion has those, has those sects that are basically the opposite of what their religion claims they care about. Though I think that for the most part, the Roman Catholic Church has been pretty decent on the issue. Pope Francis was very good. And so this new Pope Leo from Chicago seems pretty good as well. So,
We wanted to ask you, Shaenah, you want to ask him about immigration?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so um, I know you'd also written a column about the ICE raids and the deportations, and I know you attended an anti-ICE protest as well. And I'm just curious, because you're a human rights lawyer, are these deportations legal, let alone constitutional?
mm. Yeah, I would say most are not legal because, first of all, they're not offering due process rights to people, and it's well established that the Constitution protects, gives due process protections to immigrants, also free speech rights to immigrants. So, deporting people because they support Palestine, for example, is runs in the face of the Constitution. And they're now going after people, asylum seekers, which is against international law.
Yeah.
They're going after people who are here legally, right, with work visas and student visas. Um, it's just absolutely insane. And now they're even going after some citizens. And we knew this would happen. Well, you even saw there's like now, demands to deport the new Democratic candidate for mayor in New York City. I mean, that's where we're coming to, where none of us are safe. I even saw a story that ICE is going after homeless people to meet their quotas because, even if they're citizens, most homeless people aren't going to have their papers on them, right? We're going to be like South Africa where you have to carry your papers all the time, your passbook, right?
Let me see your papers.
Yes, may I see
Your
your papers? Yes. No, that's exactly what's happening. It's insane. Dare I say it's un-American, and the idea that people, the ones enforcing it, are wearing masks and don't have badges.
Yeah, I mean, if that's your work uniform, I saw somebody made a meme. It's like, I think it was Ted Rall or somebody saying like, if this is your work uniform, you are a very, very bad person. And it was just a picture of one of these
Yeah,
ICE agents with the mask on, and it's just ridiculous.
it's Gestapo type tactics. I mean, look, it is intentionally terrorizing our communities. That is the purpose of what they're doing. That is the effect, and it needs to be resisted. I mean, I just, again, this is not, people talk about freedom and democracy. This is not that, you know. I think thankfully, I think most people, well, I think in the article you mentioned that I wrote, the polls show that most people are against how this is being done. Even if they support some deportations, they do not like how this is being carried out. Again, going back to the church issue, now churches that used to be viewed as place of sanctuary, right?
Mhm.
Even if you killed a guy, you could run into a church and declare sanctuary, and the cops would not chase you in there, you know. But now that's being totally disregarded when it comes to immigration. And churches, some churches are closing because they're mostly churches of immigrants, which historically has always been true, right? Italian churches, you had your Italian churches, your Irish churches, your Slovak churches. My grandfather came to the U.S. through Ellis Island, you know. So you had, well, you even had, in New York City, Jewish immigrants that had their synagogues. I mean, places of worship have always been,
Yeah.
historically places for immigrants to go and to be with people from their countries and this sort of thing. And now that's being destroyed. I saw today, now ICE is going into hospitals, arresting people from their hospital beds, going into schools. I mean, when is there going to be a pushback? For example, why doesn't Congress pass a law saying that ICE they can't wear masks, has to have badges, needs to stay out of churches, stay out of hospitals? This is outrageous. And the other thing is we're going to have a food supply issue. There's farmers saying they can't find anyone to pick their crops. Migrants are very important in the farm business. And so yeah, it's a dark time,
I'm
very dark time.
I'm curious because what we were seeing with ICE and what we're seeing with the just blatant genocide of the Palestinians. I I think it sets a worrying precedent because sort of international law and other laws, which although international law has been applied hypocritically by the West, it's sort of just been thrown out altogether now. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on that because I feel like it's concerning.
Yes, well, I agree with you. I think Gaza is a laboratory for testing out weapons, for testing out fascist population control techniques, and for showing the world that the West has no limits, no moral limits, no legal limits to what they're willing to do to various populations in the world. And I do think that they're also setting the precedent for what they can do to their own populations back home, right? I mean, if you support, as the US is supporting, shooting children, maiming children, murdering journalists, torturing doctors, raping prisoners, they're going to do that to us. I mean, it's just, that is what the idea of having international law is, that the idea is, if those people over there aren't protected, none of us are protected. And that's an obvious truth, right? It's not just a trite statement. It's a statement of fact. And you're seeing the violence now coming home in a very real way, as you say, with what ICE is doing. And we need to resist this hard because, once these things start happening, it's very hard to reverse them, right? Rights once lost will not be given back voluntarily, right? We will have to fight for those rights back. So, in the fact that in this new so-called big beautiful bill, they're going to give $150 million to ICE, and it'll be the most funded agency in U.S. history. I mean, they're telling us something, that they're focused on violence over social programs, education, hunger, alleviation. It's violence all the time against other peoples, against our own peoples. And people need to be very, very concerned.
The immigration issue is obviously very much intertwined with the history of American intervention in Central and South America, and you published a book yourself about the history of uh, those operations in Nicaragua specifically. And I understand that's where you had kind of your own political. That's where you first got involved in politics. Was you took a trip to Nicaragua in the 80s. Could you just kind of talk about your political history, like how that started with your going to Nicaragua? I guess when it was still in the midst of the Civil War, right?
Yes, I went there in 1987. I was 20 years old, I think, at the time. And yes, the U.S. was supporting the Contra War then. And I had never, aside from going to Canada on vacation once with my folks, I never had been out of the country. And I was really, really blown away by what I saw. First of all, I saw poverty on a level I'd never seen, right? The Contra War by then had really taken a toll, and the economic blockade. And, I saw children literally in rags. And it's something I'd never seen before anyway. And I saw a population very united around the government, very supportive of the government, and fighting these Contras who had no support, none at all. And all the Contras could do is try to terrorize the population. And the fact that the U.S. was supporting these Contras after supporting the Somoza dictatorship that had been overthrown, and seeing the conditions people lived in and how like these people could not be a threat to us even if they had wanted to be, it changed me, and I also saw who was supporting the good guys, the Sandinistas. That was the Soviet Union, the Cubans, the East Germans.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, by the time I left, I said, I'm with you guys. I'm with those guys with the red flag with the hammer and sickle. That's who I'm with. And I've never gone back. I switched sides, and I'm still on that side.
I know you have to get going soon, but I did want to ask kind of end on a light note, I guess. I saw on social media you said you went to I know you were an athlete in high school, and you were teammates. I'm assuming in baseball with Ken
No,
Griffey
with
Jr.?
football. In
With football.
football with Ken Griffey Jr. Yeah.
Wow.
I was on a state championship Catholic high school football team called Moeller. This is before my conversion on the way to not Damascus, but Managua. And you know what our mascot was? We were the Holy Crusaders. Can you believe it? So I had a hunt, and so when I was the year we won the state championship, that was the year before I went to college, and by the end of my freshman year, I was going to Nicaragua. So I was a totally different person. I became a totally different person, but just as, a zealot. Yeah, I was still just as zealous just for the other side, which is kind of funny. But Catholics make great communists, by the way, because we have the saints, the bearded saints. And, yeah, so, we just have Lenin statues or whatever. So, anyway, yeah, that is the story. But I'm proud of that. It was a great time, and I was proud of being part of that. And yeah, playing with people like Ken Griffey, and who was just a nice guy. And so there you go.
Shaenah, did you have any final
Yeah, just
questions or?
my final thought is that I also come from a Christian background. I was raised Orthodox, and I found it wasn't that bumpy of a transition to becoming a communist. So I understand what you mean. And
Yeah, and by the way, in Russia, in the Orthodox churches, you'll see relics with pictures of Stalin. I mean, they don't see a problem either. And again, liberation theology for me was the bridge, right? The bridge from Catholicism to communism, because, and the priests that I've met over the years who practice liberation theology were the greatest people I've ever known. I mean, those were the best of the best, as far as I'm concerned. And I still love those people. When I come across them, there's not many left because they were all killed by the United States. That's another topic we could get into. But,
Archbishop Romero comes to mind.
like Romero, who's a saint, Saint Romero, he was martyred by the United States. And I have a big statue of him, by the way. I mean, so that's still part of who I am. And I wouldn't throw that out. And again, in Nicaragua, that was important. You had Father Miguel Escoto, who was foreign minister for the Sandinistas. You had the two brothers, what's their name? The two Jesuits, also, who were part of the Sandinista administration. I mean, that was a very liberation theologian type administration. So, I would never throw that out, as part of my politics, because I think it's important, and I think you can reach people through that too. So Chavez too, Hugo Chavez, he was very devout Catholic, So there you go.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great interview. I mean, we'd love to have you back on. I mentioned to Jeremy Kuzmarov I wanted to have the two of you on if possible, but even if it's just one, to talk about the book about Syria. I mean, you clearly have a lot of great insight and knowledge to give people about what's really happening over there. And we'll put links to your articles in CAM and LA Progressive as well, and your social media and all that. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's really great to have you, Dan.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. I truly did. I enjoyed the hour with you, and you were all both very well prepared. Great questions. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Okay, have a good weekend.
You as well.
thank you.
Okay, nice to see you. Thank you. Bye-bye.